Good afternoon and a really warm welcome to today's session, specifically focused for mental health ambassadors, champions and first aiders, given by Terry. Hello Terry, who's a previous speaker at This Can Happen and a specialist mental health trainer. Now we really want this session to be as interactive as possible. We want you to get as much out of it as you can. So Terry's going to speak to you, he's going to talk to a colleague of his. We're going to have a chat, there's going to be a couple of polls, and you should see a Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen. Please do feel free to add any comments or any questions at any time, and we will do our best to answer them. Questions only come to me, they're totally anonymous, and I can read them out to Terry. Also, there'll be a couple of polls where you'll just be asked to put in the choice which most suits what you're thinking, and then they'll be published, but once again they are anonymous as well. And then finally, I know we've all got a lot more distractions at home than we might usually have, so this session is being recorded, so please don't worry if you miss anything. You will receive a copy of it within 24 hours by email. And I think that is enough from me, so it gives me great pleasure to hand over to our guest speaker today, Terry.
Hello, thank you, Susie. I'm hoping that you can hear me. Just give me a thumbs up if you can hear me, Susie. I know that it's going out then. There we go, good, I've got it, brilliant. And hopefully you can see my slides. Good afternoon and welcome to this session, which I'm really excited about actually, because it's looking at the well-being and welfare of the people who care for others. And I think that's so often a gap, something that's forgotten about when organizations bring in mental health first aiders. For a lot of them, it can seem like a bit of a tick in the box. Job done, the well-being agenda is complete. We have first aiders, we have champions, we have allies, or whatever you're called where you work. But the next question, I suppose, should be from those organizations, who's looking after those who care? And what are they going to do with all the information that they hear, particularly now, given all the the circumstances we're all currently living through at this moment. I do speak with a South African accent. I promise you I'm based here in England, but if I do go too fast, I'm assured that you can watch it back in slow motion, so we can slow the speed down. I will try my very best. The point of today's session is to try and give you as much information as I can. I planned it so that it would be some sort of an upskill. And we can see something going on the slides there, Susie. I'm not sure what's going on, but it's not me, I promise. We're going to do some.
Everybody.
Yeah, we can see them, thank you. We're going to do some sort of an upskill in terms of maybe giving you some additional information, which is over and above your qualification or your previous training. For some of you, it may be a recap, but I think it's really important that we have a look at it. So I'm hoping you'll leave this session not only with some new information, but also having shared some ideas with colleagues who are in the trenches, just like you right now, and sharing experiences as to what it's like for them and comparing that to ourselves. So as my slide comes up, it's introducing me there, Terry Strether, yeah, and it's kind of frozen there on 20 years police officer. That's not 20 years in custody, by the way. I was a police officer working in Leicestershire Police for around 20 years. And my job whilst I was in the police, I was a manager, which is the first level of supervision. I was a sergeant, which is our first level, if you like, of supervision. And I was also a trainer. So my job was to teach officers how to handle conflict primarily. But when I was a manager, my job was working with some of the people who are on response, which means that they were the ones who would turn out when you dialed 999 or an emergency service. And these 20 men and women would be responsible for helping people out when things were extremely desperate and it was a very distressing time. They were going to things like road traffic accidents, where people had suffered life-changing injuries or been killed. They were going into homes where children were being taken away because of suspected neglect or abuse. Or maybe they were standing on the edges of high places with people who were threatening to end it all. And some of them, unfortunately, had to go around and tell loved ones that their loved ones wouldn't be coming home ever again. So you can imagine these men and women who wear the uniform as being indestructible robocops. Well, the truth is that they're people just like you and I. And so I became acutely interested in mental health, and particularly in well-being, and what we can do as managers and organizations to help people look after their well-being and build resilience. Ultimately, my job was to ensure that they were in the right mindset to be able to go out to the next call, because there's always a next call. And I wondered what your experiences were around that. We're going to chat about that in a bit in terms of there being a relentless flow of calls and people needing support right now, or maybe it's the opposite. I don't know. I became super interested in mental health. As I said, I am a mental health first aid instructor, and my company helps organizations look after the well-being of their people in its various guises. My most important job in this world is a husband and a father. Thank you, Susie. If we can move on to the next slide. It's going to be like that throughout because I don't have control of the slides. I wanted to share some information with you for a start, and that is that this isn't the first time we've been through a pandemic. This isn't the first time that humanity or us as a species has suffered challenges or experienced great challenge. We know from the herpes virus, for example, HIV, AIDS, Ebola, SARS even, that there can be a pattern that we tend to see when it comes to people's mental health and well-being post-pandemic. What we generally see is a drop in productivity and engagement within the workplace. I wonder if that reflects with any of your experience at the moment. We also see an increase in absenteeism and presenteeism. Now, I realize that I'm talking to people who are enlightened about these things, so I won't go into any great definition of what presenteeism is. We all know what I'm talking about. But what's really interesting is I think that presenteeism will only get worse in these current economic times. And my reason for saying that is, why would I want to give my boss or my manager or my organization any reason at all to make a little mark next to my name, so when rounds of redundancies come along, I'm the first one on the list. So I expect to see an increase in presenteeism in the workplace, and I don't know what your thoughts or views about that are. And then, of course, we see an increase in stress, anxiety, and depression, common mental health disorders, and we always see that in the wake of pandemics. Thanks, Susie. Now, a lot of us may be experiencing burnout right now. So for those who are still in work and haven't been furloughed, or are, perhaps holding down a job, also having the first aider or the champion function added to their workload and supporting others, perhaps caring for loved ones who are ill or elderly relatives and homeschooling. I know that's certainly been my experience with two youngsters in the house. Thankfully, I'm supported by a wife who is absolutely amazing, and she is taken to homeschooling like a duck to water, which is not without its challenges, I might add, but we do have this constant feeling of spinning plates, and I wonder if that resonates with any of you out there. But there is equally another side to the whole burnout argument that not a lot of people understand, and that's for those who have been furloughed, the concept of rust out. So burnout is used commonly in our vernacular, but what about rust out? And this is where I no longer have a purpose, a sense of meaning in my life. That I used to get up and go to work, and I was very clear about who I was and where my place in the world was. But now, since I've been furloughed, what's the point of me? What do I do? And I wonder if the people you're supporting, or maybe even you yourself, has experienced thoughts about, where am I? What is my purpose now? And where do I fit in this whole great big thing as it plays out? Okay, thank you. Lots and lots of concerns might be going through your head right now, and it's not surprising, and it's perfectly understandable. People are worried about their career, their health, the pressure of juggling, targets. Maybe there's PPE now where you work, where before there wasn't any. I'm having to come into contact with customers who perhaps aren't as accepting of the new guidelines or requirements, changes to my shift or working practices. And for a lot of people, feeling isolated is a real big problem right now. Now, I know that we're supposed to be socially distancing, but that's a physical thing. It doesn't mean that we have to socially distance emotionally, so we should still be making connections and reaching out to people. But one of the biggest problems that I'm hearing from people I work with is this inability to switch off. The workplace is now in my place of refuge. I've brought my laptop home, and now I've got notifications pinging left, right, and center, which is constantly keeping me on the ball, when really what I should be doing is unwinding. The barriers between, or the gap between my home life and my work life has been squashed together quite violently in some people's cases. There isn't a break. So before, I used to get in the car and drive home, or I used to get on public transport, whatever that may look like, and I'd have that 10-15 minutes where I could shut my mind down from the work and then pick back up into home life. But a lot of us right now have been deprived of that. There are things we can do about that, of course, and I'm going to share that in a moment before I bring this around to the mental health specific for first aiders. Thanks, Susie. Can we have the next slide? I wanted to give you a bit of an update as to where the science and the current thinking is around mental health. And I know there's a lot of talk in the media, and for us as first aiders, I think it's important that we understand where the current evidence is pointing. So the first question is, does mental illness in itself, if I have an existing or a pre-existing mental illness or a condition that I'm struggling with, does that increase my risk of developing COVID? Well, what's really interesting is the study that was released in 2020 has pointed out that, yeah, it may well do. Now, it doesn't establish causality. We don't know why this is because there's so many different environmental factors that play into this. But the evidence does seem to say that if you have suffered with a pre-existing mental health condition, your chances of developing COVID are around 65% higher than if I didn't have a pre-existing mental illness. I think that's very interesting. Lots and lots of reasons why. And again, if you have any thoughts or comments, please pop them in the chat or in the questions. Thank you, Susie. Can we move on to the next one? The other side of this, of course, is what about the other way around? Does developing COVID increase my chance of developing mental illness? And there does appear to be, from the evidence, an increased risk, at least in a survey that was done following people post-diagnosis for the next 90 days. They found that there was an increased risk of those people developing diagnosable conditions such as anxiety disorders, having problems with their sleep, dementia, and mood disorders. So there does appear to be something in the science, but the takeaway thing for me is that we don't really understand why yet. There's so much that science hasn't answered because this is such a new and constantly evolving condition. But there is certainly a link, it would seem. Thank you, Susie. Next one. And then, of course, the development of a condition which is quite new, long COVID, as it's referred. Now, we know that there are around 60,000 people currently in the UK who are suffering with this particular condition, although you can expect that number to increase. Long COVID is basically the symptoms of COVID that last for 12 weeks or more. So that's the sort of duration that they put on it, 12 weeks. And you can see the symptoms up on the screen, things like fatigue and breathlessness. The interesting thing for me is this brain fog idea, that your head is sort of in the clouds and you're not able to think clearly. And certainly I have friends who have developed COVID and they are still struggling with what they describe as brain fog. This is a fairly accurate description of where they're currently at. Thank you, Susie. Next slide, please.
Sorry, I've got a couple of questions. Do you want them now?
Oh, yeah, already?
Well, someone said, which I think is quite a good point, that you don't need to, I don't think you need to be furloughed to feel your rust out comment. And then someone else has said, are we sure of the correlation versus causation with mental well-being and COVID risk?
No, absolutely not. I think I did mention that we're not sure if this is causation. We don't know whether this is just but there does appear to be a correlation at this point. The scientists are going to have to work away doing a lot more work to understand causation. I think that's clear, but the papers that I've read, they were published in the Mental Health. I don't know if any of you are with or aware of that, but this is peer-reviewed research, which is absolutely fascinating. And they do have just released this recent paper, which I'd be happy to share a link to so that you can have a look for it yourself. But yeah, causally, no, we haven't established a causal link. But I suppose that's true in many things that we talk about when we speak of mental illness and we speak of mental health. Causality is quite problematic to establish. The other point about furlough, totally take it, absolutely. You know, furlough is just, you know, it was the context that I was trying to establish and get at in terms of people thinking that everybody who's furloughed, if you are the one still spinning the plate and still working constantly, you might think that people who are furloughed have an easier time. Well, the evidence would suggest that maybe it's not as clear cut as that. It does appear that, you know, the grass is always greener, but maybe that's not accurate. You know, so people who are on furlough, or, you know, they've got family members who are furloughed, or they, you know, so many other reasons why somebody might be experiencing rust out right now. It was just the context that I was trying to establish. Are there any more questions, Susie?
No, that's it, Terry.
Fabulous, thank you. Okay, keep them coming in, brilliant, because it's nice to know you're there, because at the moment all I can see is my slides and my own face. So it would be nice to know that you're there. Brilliant. Can we launch the poll, Susie, please? I'd love to know what people have to say about this.
Here we go.
So on your screen right now, you should see a poll. I'd love it if you could take part in this for me, please, just to get a bit of an idea about where we're at. So the question is, as a mental health and wellbeing friend or first aider or champion, I've been contacted or used more than usual during this pandemic. Is that a statement that you agree with or disagree with? I'd love to know your reality. I could ask you to pop in.
I can see people voting, Terry, so I might just give, because it's, I think you have to think about this one a bit.
Yeah, you do, yeah. Thank you.
Oh yeah, look, everyone's warming up now. Everyone's putting their answers in. Just give it another couple of seconds.
My fan heater keeps kicking on in the background. I've just turned it off to prevent the noise.
That's okay. I don't think we can hear it. Right. I think, shall I publish the results? Oh, I see people are still voting. I don't. Right. I'm going to give it 2 seconds, and I'm going to close the poll.
1, 2.
Here we go.
Okay, let's have a look. So most people agreeing that they've been used more than usual during the pandemic. That's really interesting. The reason I put this question up there is because we know that from employee assistance programs and some of the clients that I work with, that sometimes that level of contact with the first aider has actually dropped off and is actually less. And that's very interesting that amongst the community out there that are on this call, they're being used more than usual. Brilliant. I wonder if anybody who's answered that question wants to comment as to why that is and some of the nuances as to how people are being contacted. How has your organization made your contact details available, for example? If we could use the chat for that, I'd be very interested.
Someone's written here that as an occupational health nurse, definitely use more, but not as a mental health first aider.
Ah, okay, yeah.
And then someone says, a general comment, I think there's still an issue of people being comfortable coming forward with mental health related issues. Yeah, absolutely. Someone said that their role as an ambassador is being very proactive. I arrange sessions where we look at mental health as a team to share best practice. So not contacted more at present. I think as in I've been doing it all the way along. Peaks and troughs. Someone said as well, peaks and troughs, but the overall trend is a significant increase. There you go.
That's very interesting. Significant increase. Thank you very much. Yeah, brilliant stuff. Okay. Fabulous. Are we back? Thank you so much. Keep the comments coming in, by the way, as well, because I know Susie's sitting there thinking, oh, she's bored. So,
never, Terry, never.
Okay, fabulous. Let's get into this then, shall we? All right, then. Let's throw open a bit of a scenario then, because I'm very conscious that we're going to have people on this call who are very experienced first aiders and very experienced at supporting, but then perhaps others that aren't so, or maybe they've become first aiders recently during the pandemic, for example, and the only contact they've ever had with people has been virtually, or we've got people that haven't been used because everything has been face-to-face up until now. So I'd be interested in just running a little bit of a thought exercise in a scenario, and I'm happy for people on the call to take this wherever they want to take it. Really what I wanted to do was give you some information and then get out of the way, essentially. So rather than me presenting answers and presenting solutions to you, I just want to give an opportunity for us to all share. So let's just consider the hypothetical case of Sarah, who's a single parent working from home, manager responsible for a team of 10 fashion designers. In her email, which was arranging contact between you and her, she says that she feels left behind. She feels overwhelmed by the pressures of home and work life and is tired of having to be strong for everybody else. Okay, so that's the context that I'd like you to think about the person that you're going to have a conversation with. In an ideal world, what I'd like to do is split you off now into breakout sessions or something like that. But unfortunately, the functionality we haven't quite got here today. So we're going to do it through the chat function, just because I want to hear from you. Could we call the first question up, please, Susie?
Sorry, Terry, you mean as in the next slide, yes?
Yeah, please. Yeah, it should animate with the question that I'm after.
There you go.
Okay. So with Sarah then, in the context that she's given, as first aiders on the call or champions or allies, how are you going to start a conversation and build a rapport in the virtual space? Because I remember my first aid course, we didn't do anything about this kind of stuff. So I think this is a great opportunity for us to share best practice, so or what's working for you. So let's have a chat on the call. Let's see what you've got in the chat function, please. How do you build a rapport virtually? I'm going to give you some time to get your answers in. Have your pens ready, by the way, because it's well worth grabbing some of the ideas as Susie reads them out.
There's usually a little delay as people write, Terry, so you might have to talk
that's
to me.
Perfect. That gives me an opportunity to have a drink of water.
Absolutely. Oh, okay, right. Here we go. We've asked people to share experiences and shared on our intranet. This has encouraged others to speak up. Team Skype, camera on. Find more time for small talk so that a shared space can be created. You have to be intentional. Oh, arrange a coffee chat. Yeah. Reach out and ask them how they are. Try to set up a call, video call. Drop Sarah a private message on Teams and try and arrange a call. Leadership calls. Sorry, people are asking about the chat function. Yeah, there's only a Q&A box here, guys. So just use the Q&A. No, don't worry, Terry. But it is, they are all anonymous and they only come to me, as I say. Introduce yourself, try and encourage a follow-up telephone conversation. Yeah, cuppers, virtual coffees, email, demonstrate empathy. Wow, lots of responses.
Okay, brilliant. So in the virtual space then, have you noticed anything different? Are you doing anything differently in the virtual space than you would do in face-to-face meetings, for example?
Oh, someone said that they have successful sessions where volunteers have shared their stories. Nice.
Yeah.
See, sorry, I'm just trying to see, because we're still on coffee here, if there's any answer to your last question. Active listening, calling more than emailing. Someone said no, not anything different. Explain what we do and support we have for different issues. Meetings are more informal. Being more open about yourself, asking more questions because you can't see people's reactions. It's harder to see if people need to chat. Yeah, harder to build relationships remotely. Having to be more proactive for informal chats. Someone said virtual meetings are static. You have to rely on people coming to you. Less visual clues. Yeah, quite a sort of.
That's a good one, isn't it, Susie? That less visual clues for me is really interesting because you're looking at me now. You can only see me from sort of what, shoulder height up. So all of the information that we're trying to pick up on in a non-verbal way is facial expression. And we know that people can be looking off into the distance because they're looking at another screen, as I might be doing right now, and we can read into some of these signs as meaning things that they perhaps don't mean. So I think in the virtual space, whilst it's really good in the sense that I can see you, I can see, you know, your general upkeep, but still it's still a false facade, isn't it? I'm only seeing what you want me to see, in a sense. I think that's an interesting point. I could have a little bit of an insight into your world by seeing what's going on behind you, for example, the state of your home. Does that give me an insight into where you're at mentally? I don't know. It's an interesting question, isn't it? I find it very draining when I've supported people virtually. I find it quite draining, to be honest. So how can we get around it then? With some of the barriers that we've spoken about and some of the things that you've spoken up on the call here, how can we get around some of those barriers to building this rapport? Does it always need to be in a virtual space, for example? Could it just be a good old-fashioned telephone call? Do you remember when we used to do things like this? Hello? What happened to that? Is every meeting you have now a virtual call? Does it have to be? I don't know, maybe a thought. I wondered if you had any ideas about how you can try and build that rapport and get around it. Please do keep them coming in the Q&A.
Ask Sarah if possible to find some time to chat on a call, but to go out for a walk to try and get them away from the environment which may be causing them a challenge.
Yeah.
Recently took part in a Samaritan's team call and in awe of people who were able to share their stories, showing their emotion virtually. I believe we're giving people a preference, walk and talk. Yeah. Oh yeah, we have a non-related work call once a week with a team member, small talk, walking and talking. It's good.
This is all great stuff, isn't it? I love the idea of the walking and talking because you completely change the dynamic of a conversation, don't you? Usually when, I mean, these kind of calls, for example, where I'm staring at a camera and you're staring back at me, if I could see you, that can be quite confrontational in a sense because we're both face on. So one of the ways that we might reduce the tension in a virtual space is to perhaps sit side on with the camera on one side of your face. It takes, I mean, straight away, it just changes the dynamic of the conversation, rather than being, where were you on the night of the 15th, interrogation style, into a more natural way of communicating. Do you always have to make eye contact? Maybe have a discussion about that at the beginning of the session, expectations. If you are lucky enough to be in a face-to-face environment, brilliant, get out for those walking meetings. What about starting the conversation? What about starting the conversation? Can we click on to the next question, please? What would cause you to escalate your response? So, okay, then we started the conversation with Sarah. Let's just have a think about this then. In the virtual space, what would worry you? What would cause you concern where you thought you would have to escalate this further in line with your procedures and policies? What are you looking for? I'd welcome your thoughts on that. And then can we bring up the next question as well? And I'll give you a couple of questions to think about rather than going one by one. How do you bring the call to an end safely? Now, if you are concerned about someone, for example, but they don't quite meet the criteria of emergency, how do you end the call with someone, knowing that you've done all that you could possibly do? So I've asked you 2 questions there, which I'd urge you to have a think about. Share them in the Q&A.
Right, here we go.
Get your pens ready.
Let's see if they're okay. Video calls is the only time you would stare at people and analyze. It can be very uncomfortable. Yeah.
Totally agree. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Open questions to start the conversation. Dark thoughts. I ask about wins and challenges in the past week to start a conversation. End the call with a follow-up catch-up date. Nice.
Yes, good idea. Can we just pause on that one? End the call with a follow-up or a catch-up date. If you didn't get that, write that down. Of course, this will go back to your policy and how you'll use as a first aider, of course. Is it your job to check in with people? What does your company policy say? Be clear about what your company is expecting of you as a first aider so that we can ensure the professional boundaries are maintained. Good, thank you, Susie. Any more?
Change of tone, access, to tell someone you've got access to them at any time. Someone looking out for someone saying they're fine, but they're not actually they're not looking fine. Or if Sarah starts turning the video off or no longer being present, organize a follow-up call. Lots of different tone than normal, direct references to asking for help. Yeah, so that's to look out for, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. You know what I like about all of this stuff is that what we're doing is we're thinking about what we learned as first aiders or on your ally course or whatever it is that you did. We're now applying those into a virtual space. So the knowledge is still there. So what I wanted to do with this exercise was to reassure you that what you know and your current practice is still valid. It's slightly different in a virtual space, of course, and we should take these into consideration. But apply what you already know and go with it. And I just wanted to reassure you that we're all learning to be supportive to others in a virtual space together, I suppose, because it's not really done a great deal. Certainly wasn't part of my initial training as a first aider. Any more comments on how to end the call, Susie?
Sorry, we've had so much comments, and I know that time is rolling on, Terry, because I think we've only got an hour. It's about noticing the tone of someone's voice, not specifically about ending the meeting, just about concerns and how to deal with it.
Okay, great. I suppose ending the meeting goes back to my original point, which was understand what your policies and procedures are as a first aider. If you don't know, find out, okay? Because I know that it can be a real worry when you've had a conversation with someone and you're thinking, did I do all that I could do to support that person? I hope they'll be okay. Have I done what I'm supposed to do? These are all very real concerns, which I think we need to take into account. So get the information from your employer. Ask them exactly what they expect of you as a first aider, rather than just owning all of the responsibility yourself, which I think can be hugely problematic. Okay, can we move on to the next slide then, Sarah? Susie, Sarah. Okay.
Sorry.
I said Sarah and I meant Susie. I'm sorry about that. So I wanted to introduce this to you. Some of you may be aware of this. This is called the Kubler-Ross change curve, but others may not have seen it. And I think it's directly relevant to the current circumstances that we're all experiencing. It has to do with how people, and our brains in particular, respond to change. It's taken from the world of bereavement counseling or grievance counseling, but it's also applied in a management context. I think it's very useful for us to bear in mind or think about when we consider that we all may be in the same storm, but perhaps we're not all in the same boat as such. You know, so we're not all in the same boat. More like we're in the same storm, but different boats, because our personal circumstances are so very different. So if you could just hit next for me then, Susie, just to call up the animation, it'll show you what I mean. So it looks something like this. The bottom axis refers to the amount of time, and then the vertical axis refers to your morale or competence stroke confidence in your ability to get through this. It doesn't mean your competence in your job. That's not what I mean. But generally speaking, when we experience a trauma or some significant change, we might go through something like this. I don't intend to go through each phase of this because you can do your own research on it. It was just to point you in the direction of this curve that it exists. And then to, oh, hang on, we've gone too far. Can we just drop back one, Susie? Thank you. To just bear in mind that we're all at different places on this curve. It's not linear in the sense that I go from shock to denial to anger. It doesn't work that way. We can drop in at various points. What we tend to find is people who demonstrate higher levels of resilience will be able to work their way over to the right of the chart an awful lot quicker than perhaps those who don't have that level of resilience or are struggling with their own well-being. And as I look at this, I'm sort of reminded of the behavior of certain world leaders in recent events, certainly over the water. The shock, denial, anger, bargaining type thing. We see this quite a lot, and if you look around, you'll see it perhaps in conversations in social media and things like that. We tend to find that people who are over to the left of the chart are looking backwards at what has been lost, whereas people who are more resilient are able to look forwards and integrate a new reality. And what I find most interesting about the curve is the idea that the end points of each line are very different. If you notice, over to the right, much higher than that on the left. And in that is this implication that not all trauma or stress need result in illness. Not all trauma or stress leads to post-traumatic stress disorder. What we know from the research is that an awful lot of people will experience what we refer to as post-traumatic growth. In other words, the trauma or the stress has made them a stronger version of who they were before. That's not to say that we would choose to go through what we're going through now, but I think the idea that all adversity is bad, we need to kind of, think about that and reframe that, because that's not actually true. We can actually get stronger and develop. Now, the people that you support will be at various places. I would suggest if they're seeking the help of a first aider, they're towards the middle of the chart somewhere, or maybe even right back at the beginning. But don't be surprised if, having made the choice that, I can't control what's going on around me right now, but I can control how I choose to respond to the situation. Having made that choice, I could still wake up tomorrow morning and feel really angry about what has been, and that's okay. That's okay. All right. So it was just to give you some understanding of how people process change and what we go through. Susie, can I suggest that we jump to 13, to slide 13, please? Are you able to do that on your magic slide presenter? Jump again, and again, and take us to this little area here, because I want to bring Claire in a moment to talk about these. But as first aiders, I think we need to be aware of these issues in supporting others. Now, in other caring professions, counselling, for example, you would require some sort of clinical supervision that looks after your well-being as a practitioner. But we don't really have that level yet for mental health first aiders. So I'm going to bring Claire in a moment, who's going to talk about what they're doing to support their first aiders team, just to make you aware that we've already spoken about burnout, physical and emotional exhaustion. But I wonder how many of us might have experienced compassion fatigue, and where we're supporting someone, but we've just got nothing left to give. And I see this quite a lot in emergency service workers, and I've seen this when I've, say, for example, been to the A&E department, where they're dealing with catastrophic things constantly, all day, every day. And you can imagine the situation, running in there with my 7-year-old son who's got a piece of Lego stuck up his nose, and I'm going, quick, we need to get the doctor. And the nurse behind the counter goes, yeah, we'll get to you in a minute. Name. And it's not that that nurse is a bad person, or that they mean any harm, or they're dismissing my experience or the experience of my son. They get it. They understand the panic. But it's just that given all the there's nothing left to give. I wonder if any of us have ever felt that way. And then the other one on the right of the screen, vicarious trauma. And we should be slightly mindful of this from our world as mental health trainers, and when we've done our first aid courses and things like that. But it can lead to a shift in worldview. The trauma of others leads me to believe that this is now my trauma. And the challenging thing for us is the closer we get to a situation and the more empathetic we are, the more at risk we are of these things. And I think sometimes the very qualities and personal characteristics that draw people to become mental health first aiders and champions in the first place sometimes mean that we're the ones putting other needs in front of our own, and we can be at higher risk of developing these conditions. So it's just to make you aware, you know, that really we shouldn't be getting too emotionally drawn in, because that can actually be harmful both to us and to the healing process. Can we click to the next one, Susie? Thank you. A reminder, it is not your job as a first aider to fix or diagnose people. You know, it's really important that we stress that. In fact, the evidence is really interesting. If you click the next one for me, Susie, please. Research by a guy called Robert Sapolsky, who in his book Behave quotes work of other neuroscientists and behavioral psychologists, etc. And he looks at this and suggests that empathetic states such as empathy or, you know, compassion and things like that are more likely to produce compassionate acts when they are managed at a detached distance. So I'm sure we've all seen the video on empathy where, you know, you're down in the hole with someone. It's a YouTube video that you can find out a definition of empathy, which is really good. And in fact, I think they show it on some courses. But be mindful of being stuck down in the hole with people, because that can often cause you personal problems, draw you in, but also mean that the support that you're giving to others might not actually be as good or as appropriate and effective as it could be. It turns out that we're able to act compassionately best when we have a detachedness from it, just a little bit. You know, a careful balancing act, isn't it, really? Because you want people to trust you, you want people to feel like you're empathizing with the situation, but be mindful of the possible negative impact on you and don't be drawn in. I've heard examples of first aiders giving their personal numbers to people and said, oh yeah, you know, if you ever need me, give me a ring on my mobile. And then when that first aider has been on the beach on holiday, for example, when we were allowed to do such things, they're receiving phone calls from people who need help. So that detachedness, that almost professional boundary, if you like, needs to be maintained. It really does. And I hope that I am talking to the converted. Can we bring the next poll question in, please, Susie, and then we'll bring Claire in for a discussion.
Okay, here we go. Should see it now.
We can see it, thank you. So this question is about how you're being supported by your organization. Remember, this is anonymous, and I would appreciate your honesty.
So thank you, everybody, for all your comments. Everyone's been so interactive. It's great.
Can't see any of them, so please don't think that I'm being ignorant. Susie's managing all the comments for me.
No, it's really good. Sorry, I'm just okay. So that's 50% of you voted. Just going to give it another couple of seconds because I know we need to talk to Claire, and it's 20 to 4, and we're all busy. So much
plenty
to get
of
through.
Time. 20 minutes. Come on, plenty of time. Are there any other comments that have come in whilst you're just waiting for the poll results?
Oh, who is the author of the quote, please? There you go.
Ah, it comes from a book. What is it called? It's Robert Sapolsky. Robert Sapolsky, Sapolsky. He wrote a book called Behave. Absolutely fascinating, well worth a read. And if you're into heavy textbook style material about neuroscience, I'd recommend it. It's something that I've owned for many years, and I'm working my way through it still. Because I'm not a neuroscientist, but he has a way of putting things across. You can also, by the way, check him out on TED Talks. He's got a fantastic TED Talk about behavior and decision making, and also on YouTube. Excellent videos, and they're only 5 minutes long. Really fantastic.
Here we go. There you go.
Okay, I feel that my organization has been supporting me well. That's very interesting. Again, strong agrees. Excellent. I'm really heartened to hear that. And even strongly agrees is the second highest. That's fantastic. So let's bring Claire in, if I may, to have a chat about this. Let me introduce Claire, if you just call up the next slide for me. So Claire, hi. Thank you for joining us. Would you like to introduce yourself to the millions of people at home?
I don't know how many people are on, but hopefully not that many. So I'm Claire Kershaw. I'm Health and Wellbeing Manager at Next, and I look after all of the wellbeing initiatives that we do at Next. And we've been very busy during lockdown, especially. Yes, but hopefully tell you a little bit more about what we do with our mental health first aiders. But obviously, I'll be led by your questions, Terry.
Oh, well, yeah, led by mine, but also led by the audience. So, Susie, if you could keep an eye on the Q&A, because what I'd like to do, whilst Claire and I are just warming up and introducing her and her experience, I'd love it if you had any questions of Claire. Claire's responsibility is looking after her team of mental health first aiders. So could you tell us a little bit about that, Claire, and then hopefully some questions will start putting in from the audience.
Yeah, sure. So we trained our mental health first aiders about 4 years ago, and obviously what we wanted to do, and I think Terry alluded to this earlier on, that actually sometimes what can happen is companies train mental health first aiders and then just let them go, and obviously we didn't want to do that. So what we did is we set up a network group for our mental health first aiders, and we meet every 3 months. So obviously when we were able to meet in a normal world, that was lovely. We used to do really nice things like have afternoon tea and breakfast meetings and just do nice things with mental health first aiders, tell them about new things, let them be the first to know what we were doing. But obviously, since we've been in lockdown, we've continued with those meetings on a virtual basis. So our group is called Open Minds. We meet every 3 months. Since we've been in lockdown, we've opened it to all of our divisions, mental health first aiders, so there's quite a big group of us, but it just means we're still all connected, and that we have a chance to kind of talk to each other, upskill knowledge, just share experiences. I know Terry and I have spoken about some of those meetings. We've been able to share stories of how people have dealt with situations and how they've managed to talk people out of maybe things that they were thinking of doing, and quite serious situations. So we've kind of used those examples to help people in those meetings as well. We're also very aware that obviously we're not seeing each other all the time, so we have a chat room. So we again share experiences. We talk about maybe interesting articles that people should read, books that people should read, podcasts they should be listening to. All those kind of things, just to kind of keep the mental health first aiders connected with each other. And there's been, some mental health first aiders have actually had a little bit of a wobble themselves during lockdown. But because we've got this support group, there's lots of chat going on, and we're regularly sort of keeping in contact and talking to each other, which is great. So those meetings have continued throughout the whole of lockdown. So it's been really, really, really useful to do that.
So it sounds like, I'm interested in, you've had mental health first aiders who have perhaps struggled with their own well-being during lockdown. Is that because of their role as first aiders or because of the situation?
Well, do you know, the two things actually. I think that surprisingly from your poll earlier on, it was quite surprising to say that people have found that they've been more used as mental health first aiders, because that definitely hasn't been the case for us. And I know we have regular meetings with our employee assistance provider, and again, their results would say the same, that actually their usage has gone down. Been a couple of peaks over the time, but generally speaking, usage has gone down. So I don't think necessarily it's because of the conversations, although there is a couple of situations that have happened that may have caused a little bit of a wobble. We had actually one of our members of staff who passed away from COVID, and obviously a lot of the team that person works with were affected. So the mental health first aider in that area is used quite a lot. So again, I was very aware of that. We have a log of conversations that people have, or not the detail, but the number of conversations, and I could see this girl was being used quite a lot, and I knew about the situation. So I was able to quite quickly check in with her, make sure she was okay, because she was being used quite a lot because of obviously the crisis situation she was dealing with. But a couple of the other mental health first aiders were put on furlough just because of the job that they do. And although a lot of them still continue to support as a mental health first aider, they were having wobbles a bit like the kinds of the rust out situation you talked about earlier on, that because they weren't being used for work, they kind of lost their purpose almost. Yes. So again, it was really important to keep those people connected as well, because their role of the first aid, mental health first aider, was still so valuable.
Yeah, so I know that obviously the retail sector as a whole has been battered by this whole COVID experience over the months.
Yeah.
So how have you made sure that your people know how to access the mental health first aiders?
Yeah, so for different divisions, different ways. We have different communication methods. I'll talk about head office first of all, and the online operation. So we've had to change our contact methods because you used to be able to call somebody's extension number and they were sitting at their desk waiting for a call. And of course, people aren't at their desks. A lot of people are working from home, so we've had to work on chat conversations or email to then say, can we speak, or can we just chat and have a conversation, or can we set up a video call? So not being able to phone necessarily if people don't have a company mobile. You mentioned earlier on, we don't allow people to share personal phone numbers, so of course it has to be on the means that we've got. We're in the process of, should I say, issuing our mental health first aiders in the call centre with mobile phones, quite basic mobile phones actually, just because of the shifts they work and the coverage of shifts. It's easier to give them mobile phones to be able to take calls. So that's something else we've had to do in lockdown, just to make them more accessible when people need them. Because although we haven't been used as much, I think when we have been used, I think the situation's sometimes been a little bit more serious than the norm. So right, I think okay. My view as well is about people not maybe using mental health first aid as much as we've got a lot of people working from home. So in our call centres, for example, we've got about 800 people working from home. Sometimes it's really difficult for people to call a mental health first aider or chat a mental health first aider when you've got your family at home with you. So I think sometimes people have reached out in other ways to try and find help and support rather than to call when they're actually sort of locked down at home with their family. So that's kind of my thought on it, that people haven't really always had the space to be able to talk openly with this family at home.
That's a really interesting point. I wonder if anybody who's watching has experienced the same or has a view on that. I'd be very interested in hearing that. How do you make sure, before I go to the questions, because I'm sure there are some, but how do you make sure that your first aiders aren't taking on more than they can cope with?
Yeah, so we've always had, this isn't a because of lockdown COVID thing, we've always had a terms of use for mental health first aiders. So the mental health first aiders know what they should and shouldn't be doing. There's also what to expect from mental health first aid document as well, so that people know what they can go to the mental health first aider for. So yes, of course, we wouldn't allow people to talk to anyone that needs help outside of their shift. We wouldn't allow people to give personal telephone numbers out. And we wouldn't allow people to indulge people in hour-long conversation, hours and hours and hours. If people are needing the mental health first aiders for copious amounts of time each week, then they're probably needing more help than the mental health first aiders can provide. So we also say, if you're setting aside 30 minutes to talk to someone, talk to them for 30 minutes, and at 25 minutes, just let them know you've got 5 minutes, 5 minutes more to chat. Is there anything else they particularly wanted to talk about? Of course, you can see them again next week or the next day, whenever. But actually, you can't just let someone talk to you for hours and hours and hours. You have to kind of have parameters, as you would if you went to see, a counsellor or a psychologist. So we also encourage them to stay within the parameters as well. They're not, they can only provide so much support, like a physical first aider, really. You do what you can do and then pass on to someone that's kind of a more specialist role.
I've got loads more questions for you, Claire, but obviously we work closely, so I know a lot of the answers. I wondered if there's any coming in on the Q&A, Susie.
There absolutely are. Thank you so much, Claire. Okay, I'm going quick fire. Okay. How do you recommend managing supporting staff mental health needs and completing business as usual tasks?
So sorry, supporting mental health first aid, supporting
with obviously needing to do your job basically, and business as usual tasks. How do you balance the two?
Yeah, it's really tricky. I mean, we've talked with mental health first aiders about this, that actually, if people are becoming overwhelmed and we look at our log and you can see that some mental health first aiders are being used more than others, you can see that there's some very popular people that people go to, and we ask them to be realistic about how many conversations they're having, and if they do feel overwhelmed because of work pressures or whatever, all they need to do is direct them to another colleague, another mental health first aider. We're all in connection with each other, and and sometimes there's chats about I don't really know what to say to this person. Have you got any advice? Any other ideas what I could do to this person? So sometimes, not only are they asking for help for someone else to talk to someone, but they're also asking for help and how they can help that person. But yeah, we ask people to kind of share the load, because there are some people that are definitely use more than others.
And I know from working with you in the past, Claire, that you've brought in this idea of 1 hour, so that we can sort of manage how long that person's using, because that worker who is a mental health first aider is doing so on a voluntary basis, aren't they? That's not what they're employed to do. So
of course.
This need still needs to be taken care of, doesn't it?
Yeah, and we also don't want people to feel so overwhelmed and then they get sort of, feeling under pressure themselves, because the fact that they've got a target to meet and actually they've got somebody who they know really needs their help. So we ask them to sort of reach out themselves to get other people, to kind of help. Some people might not be as busy. Some people are on furlough, for example. So actually, they have probably got a little bit more time to help someone that might be struggling. So it is about just using the mental health family, I'm going to call it.
And from a logistics perspective, it's you who sits in the hot seat, distributing work in a sense to make sure that the work is evenly distributed. Would you say that's best practice for people out there who have first aiders? Should there be someone like a Claire Kershaw within their organisation?
I think you need someone to just kind of cast a view over what's going on. And we've recently, we've learned huge amounts since we started our kind of mental health journey. We weren't perfect at the beginning. We've learned a lot, but one of the things that we have done is we log all of the conversations, so we can see the number of conversations, who's having them, how long those conversations are lasting. We've got a stats guy who's amazing, and I asked him if he could put some stats together, so when I go onto this log, I can visually see pie charts and graphs and things, which are way beyond what I could do. But I told him what I wanted, and I can see them now, and I can instantly look and see how many conversations, what was the theme, was it work, was it home, was it health, and I could generally get a feel of what the type of conversation was, and I can see straight away who those first aiders are that are being used all of the time. And it's just a very visual, and that's when I saw there was a particular girl who I know she'd been dealing with people that were struggling with grieving for this particular employee, and I was able to call her, and she actually came back and said, "Thank you for reaching out for me, I am fine." But do you know, it was just knowing that she's obviously having a lot of conversations and that somebody's looking out for her. So yeah, I think having someone to cast their eye is really positive, is really key.
I love that, Claire. You can't beat a pivot table. Fan of a pivot table.
I can't do one, but I can act on it.
So we've had loads of questions, which is amazing, and obviously we're not going to have time to answer them, but I thought this was quite interesting. Someone said that they're in the start of their recruiting of their wellbeing buddies program as part of their strategy. What are the main pitfalls to watch out for, and learning from both your experience further down the line? Are there anything they should think about now rather than later?
In terms of who they recruit as a mental health first aider or a support, was that the question? Do we think? I think
so, yeah, recruiting buddies, yes.
Yeah, one of the things, I don't know, I'm gonna add this in just for value, but we made the decision not to give any rewards or payments for our mental health first aiders. And the reason for that is we wanted people to do the role because they genuinely felt that they had a passion for it, rather than because it gave them another £25 a month, whatever people pay. I don't know, but some companies do pay their mental health first aiders. So we don't do that, but we do try to reward them in other ways. So at Christmas we gave them a hamper, and we do when we were able to, we did like nice meetings with afternoon tea and things like that. But I think paying people isn't necessarily the right thing. I also think that sometimes people who've had their own mental health struggles can be quite good mental health first aiders, but sometimes that has kind of caused problems as well. So I think maybe decide or find out whereabouts they are in their own journey and where they are, because I think sometimes somebody that is maybe still going through the recovery process or actually getting on an even keel it might not be quite the right time for them. And also I think when we advertised, we wanted people to give us a real reason why they wanted to do it, rather than somebody just put a hand up and go, yeah, I want to do it. It was definitely we kind of went out and wanted to hear their story about why they wanted to be part of the whole community.
Fabulous. I think we've got time for another question, Susie, if there are any.
Yeah, what do you want to do, Terry? Because we're quite. Do you want to go back to the presentation, or do you just want to carry on chatting now?
No, I'd like to have a few more questions if that's okay. I think that's where the value is.
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. What system do staff use to report who they are seeing and how many they are seeing?
Okay, so we've got it set up on, we use Google, and it's on a Google form. So all they do is dead easy. They submit a Google form. The questions are, how long were you talking to the person? Was it work, home, just general categories? Were you a first referral? And what were your recommendations? So as in, did you tell me to go to the GP, phone the EAP, follow-up visit, follow-up chat, whatever. And then that, I see the results of that on a Google Sheet. And obviously from the Google Sheet, that's where I get my stats from. So the Google Sheet then generates the pivot table and the bar charts. So it's literally a simple Google form does the job.
Fantastic.
It's brilliant.
Fancy, no fancy reporting dashboards, just a
no,
table.
it's really not. It's really not, and it's just very basic questions of you know, what the conversation, the length of the conversation, and it's just so we can get a feel. We don't know who they spoke to. We don't know the detail of who they spoke to or anything. It's literally just some very high level information that we can then use to kind of see usage, etc.
Perfect. Someone said that they have a charter for wellbeing ambassadors to make their roles and responsibilities clear for them and for the leadership. That's quite a good idea.
Yeah.
Right, quick. Who do you use to train your MHFAs?
I
didn't type that.
Yeah, that's Terry's question. No, I'm joking.
I didn't type that.
So yes, we use Oakwood Training. Their director is Terry Strether, and you know, Terry's been amazing for us, very supportive, very encouraging, and obviously we've actually got a really good kind of sort of relationship and connection now because of the support that Terry's has given us. So I you know, I don't need to. I'm here talking and saying how amazing they are. So that's kind of, I don't need to say anything else. But yeah, Oakwood Training.
I genuinely didn't write that. That's super awkward. Let's move on, shall we? I wanted to finish.
I thought that was going to be slightly broader. Sorry. Okay, here's just one more. How do you make your first aiders accessible? Is there a single point of contact or a list of first aiders and staff that they can choose?
Yes. Yeah. Very good question. Very good question. And one that's quite pertinent actually, because we have posters around the site. We have a Google wellbeing site with all their names and contact details on there, and you can choose whoever you want to speak to. So if I work in the IT team, I might not want to speak to the mental health first aider in IT. I might want to speak to the mental health first aider who works in women's wear because they don't know me and they know nothing about me. So we allow people to talk to whoever they want to. But interestingly, somebody said to me the other day, do you know what I've been thinking? It wasn't a mental health first aider, it was a manager. They said, I think what would be a really good idea is for us to have like a hotline for us so it can be manned by mental health first aiders. And I said, I don't think that's a very good idea. Because, you know, once you've spoken to a mental health first aider, your chosen mental health first aider, you want to continue your chats with that person if you need to. You don't want to phone a hotline and just get anybody. You want to choose who you want to speak to, and you want to, you know, then have the relationship with that person to move forward. So I said that was, to me, that wasn't the right thing to do. And the other thing is, when we first went into lockdown, somebody suggested, oh, if you need a mental health first aider, maybe you fill in a Google form and then somebody picks that up. And I said, people in crisis don't fill in Google forms. Unfortunately, they don't. So again, I think that, you know, you don't need a system or a procedure or something clunky. You just need a personal contact, and you choose who you want to speak to, and you make that connection with that person. And we have little, when we weren't in the virtual world, we have these little cards that says you've spoken to, and they write their name on there and their contact details and hand it to the person, almost like, you know, if you need me again, here I am kind of thing. And that worked really well when we were kind of able to do that. But obviously you can just do a chat message afterwards with that person if you want to now.
Fantastic. Thank you.
So thank you. Now I'm aware that it's 4 o'clock. So Terry, I wanted to close, because I can see that people are having to go to different meetings. People are saying that they've having to leave. So is there anything you wanted to say?
I do want to close. Can you put up slide 19 for me, please, just to bring this all to a close?
Yep.
In terms of looking after yourself, ladies and gentlemen, on this call, you know, when we teach first aiders, it's important to prioritize time for you, and I think we need to practice what we preach. The trouble with this stuff is a lot of it is common sense. It's just not common practice. It's just not common practice, and we need to put it into place. So if you could go forward one more piece to there. I think all of these things on this slide apply. Make sure you're getting accurate information from your employer and from your news and from social media, because your brain gets what it looks for. Just like the algorithms in social media, the more you search for something, the more it offers you the same thing. Be kind to yourself. Journaling is fantastic. Think about replacing that commute that you used to have. You know, what do you walk to work now? You know, if you work from home, do you walk out of your front door for 10 minutes and walk back, and that's your commute? Give it a go. You can still do the things you used to do. Journal, and then finally, for me, the biggest thing, switch off, learn to shut down, and only then can we truly build our resilience and look after our own well-being. You can't help anyone if you're broken yourself. Please remember that. Okay. I hope you found this useful. Thank you so much for having me. I've had a great time. Thank you to Claire for joining us.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Terry. That has been absolutely brilliant. And thank you so much to everybody for joining us. Your comments and questions have been overwhelming, and I'm sorry that we haven't been able to answer them all. Just to reiterate, because a lot of people have asked, you will receive this webinar with the slides and Terry and Claire, and it will come within 24 hours via email. And then finally, for those who don't know, This Can Happen awards are now open. So if you're very proud of your mental health team or colleagues and wish to celebrate their work or their contributions, please do consider entering our awards. You could see the details on our website, which is on the slides. And that is it from us. Oh, finally, a brief evaluation form should pop up on the screen as soon as I finish this webinar. It'd be really helpful to us if you wouldn't mind just filling it in. Okay, everyone, thanks so much. I'm now going to end the webinar. Have a good day, everyone. Bye. Bye, Terry. Thanks, Claire.
Take care.